Arizona Territory, May 1882. The sun had already blistered the sky to a pale white when Delia Orwood realized the train was not coming back. She sat alone on the cracked wooden bench at the Pitney station, a one-room depot surrounded by nothing but creosote brush, dust, and silence. Her wedding dress, once ivory, now wore the color of the desert wind. She had waited one day. Then two. Now on the third, her breath came raw and shallow. The man she was supposed to marry, Samuel, had promised he would meet her here. Promised he had bought the land in Tucson. Promised they would start a life. But the train had long pulled away, and she had not seen a single soul since the station master wandered off 2 days before to fetch help, and never returned. Her trunk sat to her left, untouched since she arrived. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, and her hands trembled from heat and hunger. Her boots, too fine for this ground, were cracked from walking the platform back and forth until the soles split. The wind picked up, and with it came the sound of hooves. Delia stood, shading her eyes. A lone rider approached from the east, his silhouette sharp against the horizon. He rode without hurry, like a man unbothered by time. The closer he came, the more details set him apart: dust-covered shirt rolled to the elbows, a wide hat shadowing his face, and the easy seat of someone who had spent more years in the saddle than out of it. He pulled up beside the platform and looked down at her. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, voice low and steady. She took a breath but did not answer right away. Her throat was too dry. He dismounted in one fluid motion and stepped up to the platform. He removed his hat, revealing wind-ruffled dark hair and eyes the color of worn leather. "Name's Boone Granger. Was not expecting to find anyone out here." Delia looked at him, chest tight. "I was supposed to be met by my fiancé 3 days ago." Boone's eyes flicked to her trunk, then to her dress. "You been here since then?" "Yes." He exhaled slowly and crouched beside her trunk. "You got food?" "No." He opened one of his saddlebags and pulled out a tin. "Dried peaches. Not fresh, but they will hold you up." She took the tin with shaking hands and ate without speaking. Boone waited. When she finished, he offered her a canteen. She drank, then looked away and wiped her mouth. He crouched beside her. "What is your name?" "Delia Orwood." "You got any people expecting you?" "Family." She shook her head. "Samuel was all I had. He wrote me letters. Said he bought land. Sent a photograph once." Her voice cracked. "He said he loved me." Boone's jaw tightened. He stood and looked out toward the empty tracks. "If he left you out here, Delia, he is not worth wasting your heart on." "I do not think I have much heart left," she said, looking down at the hem of her dress. He was quiet for a while. Then he asked, "You want to stay here and wait longer?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I do not." Boone nodded. "I am trailing cattle north, but my route passes close to Bisbee. Sheriff there is a good man. He will help you settle or send a wire to someone you trust." "I do not have anyone." He looked at her again, longer this time. Not pity, just the kind of look a man gives when he is thinking something through, slow and careful. "Then come with me," he said. "You will ride my horse." "I will walk." "I cannot take your horse," she said. "You can," Boone said gently. "And you will." His tone left no room for argument. Delia stood, her legs nearly giving out. Boone caught her elbow and steadied her. She looked up at him, and for the first time in 3 days, something inside her steadied. Boone helped her onto the horse, secured her trunk behind the saddle, and walked alongside, the sun falling lower behind them. They traveled in silence. Dust kicked up from his boots, and her fingers curled tight around the saddle horn. Every so often he looked up at her and just nodded, like he understood too well what it meant to be left behind. As the sky turned lavender and the stars began their slow reveal, Boone made camp beneath a twisted mesquite tree. He built a small fire, not speaking much, but his presence was solid, unmoving. Delia sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. "Why are you helping me?" He stirred the fire with a stick. "Because someone should have." She looked at him, then really looked, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the way he moved, like he was used to being alone but did not hate it. He was not like Samuel. Boone's kindness came without decoration or promise. That night, she slept curled in a blanket beside the fire. Boone kept watch. He did not sleep. His rifle lay across his lap, but his eyes were on her. The next morning they rode on. 3 days passed. Delia's dress was gone now, packed away. Boone had given her a shirt and trousers from his saddlebags. They were too big, but she could move in them. She rode better now, too, her posture stronger. On the 4th night, they crested a ridge and saw the lights of Bisbee down below. Boone looked over at her. Town's just ahead. You still want to see the sheriff? Delia hesitated. He watched her carefully. You do not have to decide tonight. We can make camp just outside town. Give you rest. She nodded. All right. That night, after the fire died low, Delia sat beside him beneath the stars. She looked at him, her voice quiet. You never asked why I agreed to marry a man I had never met. Boone did not look away from the fire. I figured you had your reasons. I was tired of being alone, tired of waiting for things to change. He finally looked at her. And now? Delia's voice was barely a whisper. Now I am not sure what I want. Except she stopped. Boone leaned closer. Except what? She looked into his eyes. Except this. Right now. Sitting here with you. Boone's breath caught just for a second. Then he reached out, slow and careful, and brushed her hair back behind her ear. I have been alone a long time too, Delia. She leaned into his hand. Not anymore. And he kissed her, not rushed, not uncertain, but steady and full of everything neither of them had said. She kissed him back, and something inside her came unbroken. Tomorrow they would ride into town. But tonight, under the stars and beside the fire, Delia Orwood was no longer the abandoned bride, and Boone Granger was no longer just a passing cowboy. They had found something in the middle of nowhere neither of them had dared to hope for. Something real, something lasting. The hills above Bisbee were quiet at dawn, touched by the pale gold of first light. Boone stood at the edge of the ridge, one hand resting on his belt, the other shading his eyes as he watched the town slowly come awake below. Behind him, the fire had gone to embers and Delia stirred inside the canvas lean-to he'd pitched with his spare tarp. She stepped out barefoot, the dry grass cool beneath her soles. The trousers she wore were cinched high with a strip of cloth he'd cut from the lining of his saddlebag. She hadn't spoken yet, but her eyes were clear in the morning light, no longer dulled by shock. Is it always this quiet? She asked. Boone turned, nodding toward the town. Before the mines start up, yes. Once the whistles blow, it'll rattle your teeth loose. Delia glanced down at the scattered rooftops. I never thought I'd see Arizona. I thought I'd be living in a house with lace curtains, not sleeping under a tarp. Boone didn't laugh, only said, Curtains are overrated. Shade's all that matters out here. She smiled faintly, not with amusement but with something softer, something beginning to root inside her. They broke camp without hurry. Delia helped Boone roll the tarp, her motions more sure now. She didn't ask what would happen next or where she was expected to go. Boone didn't offer answers he hadn't been asked for. By the time they reached Bisbee's edge, the town had kicked into motion. Mule teams shifted under harness. A boy with copper hair and no shoes ran past them with a bucket of water soaking the front of his shirt. A woman sweeping her porch paused to watch them pass, eyes narrowing when she saw Delia's borrowed clothes and Boone walking beside her. Delia didn't flinch. She held her chin high, though her fingers twitched at the seams of her sleeves. Boone led her to a low building near the livery, a single-story structure with a broad porch and a tin sign that read Town Marshal. He didn't knock. He opened the door and stepped inside. The man behind the desk looked up from a spread of handbills. He was broad across the chest, with thinning blonde hair and a weathered badge pinned crooked on his shirt. Boone, he said, you bleeding or just visiting? Neither. Boone stepped aside. Marshal, this is Delia Orwood. She needs a place to rest. Maybe a wire sent east. The marshal stood, offered his hand across the desk. Ma'am, you're welcome here. Delia took it, her grip steady. I'm not sure who I'd wire, she said. I thought I had someone. The marshal's expression shifted, but he didn't press. You're welcome to stay in the holding room for now. We've got a cot and fresh water. Just until you figure your bearings. Delia nodded. She didn't look at Boone. Boone turned to go, but her voice stopped him. Where will you be? He looked over his shoulder. I've got work. Cattle outside of Mule Pass. I'll be back through in a few days. She didn't ask him to stay, and he didn't offer. But their eyes held a moment longer than necessary. That night, Delia lay on the cot, listening to the sounds of boots on boardwalks, the creak of wagons, the distant thump of hammers. It was a town built on copper and chance, and she didn't belong to either. But she didn't feel lost. Not anymore. In the morning, she found work without asking for it. The marshal's wife, a quiet woman named Ruth, handed her a bucket and a rag and pointed toward the windows. They haven't been washed in 2 months, Ruth said. I can't reach the tops. Delia didn't argue. She washed the windows, then the floors. By noon, Ruth handed her a plate of bread and beans and sat beside her on the bench outside. You come here with Boone? Delia nodded. He don't talk much, but folks listen when he does. Delia tore a piece of bread and said nothing. Seen the way he looked at you, Ruth added. Like he's not used to looking at anyone that long. Delia didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. 3 days passed. Boone didn't return. On the 4th, Delia walked to the edge of town and waited near the dry wash where the mesquite trees gave a little shade. She sat on a low stone and watched the road. Dust rose before she saw him. Boone rode in with a fresh cut above his brow and dust caked along his collar. When he saw her, he pulled the reins and dismounted without a word. His eyes flicked to her hands clean, nails trimmed, no blisters. You been working? She nodded. Ruth keeps me busy. He looked toward the town. You still want to go back east? Delia stood. No. Boone watched her for a long moment. Then he said, I've got a line shack out past San Pedro. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. She took a step closer. Does it have a roof? It does. Then I'd like to see it. He didn't touch her. Not yet. But there was something in his expression that shifted. Like a door opened quietly inside him. You sure? He asked. Delia nodded. I've done enough waiting. Boone held out his hand. She took it. The trail east of Bisbee narrowed into a ribbon of sun-baked earth bordered by mesquite and ocotillo that clawed at the air. Boone rode ahead, leading the sorrel mare by its reins while Delia sat astride, her knees braced better now, her posture quiet and sure. She hadn't spoken since they left the town behind, didn't need to. The silence between them had settled into something companionable. By noon, they reached a shallow arroyo where cottonwoods leaned over a thin stream. Boone tethered the horses in the shade and handed Delia a strip of cloth from his saddlebag. For your neck, he said. Thank you. She dipped it in the water and pressed it to her skin, eyes closing as cool relief spread beneath her collar. Boone crouched beside the stream, refilling his canteen. His movements were deliberate but not slow. He seemed more at ease here than he'd been in town, less watchful, more rooted. You built the shack yourself? Delia asked, unwrapping a biscuit from the cloth bundle Ruth had pressed into her hands that morning. Mostly, Boone said. Found the frame half standing when I bought the cattle. Roof was gone, door hung crooked. I fixed what needed fixing. She watched him check the cinch on the mare. You always work alone? Not always, he said. But I don't ask for help unless I mean it. Delia broke the biscuit in half and held it out. Boone took it without hesitation, nodding once in thanks. They ate in silence. The wind rustled the cottonwood leaves, and a hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing faintly. When they rode out again, the land began to rise, the air thinning and the brush giving way to scattered stands of juniper. The trail twisted between low hills, and by the time the sun dipped toward the edge of the world, the shack came into view. It sat on a gentle slope above a dry gully, its shape plain and square, with a stovepipe poking from the roof and a split-rail fence marking off the corral. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, and a mule raised its head from a feed bin as they approached. Delia slid down from the saddle before Boone could offer a hand. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she took in the structure weathered boards, a small porch, A door hung straight now. One shuttered window faced west, catching the last light. "You've been back since Bisbee," she said. Boone unsaddled the mare and nodded. "Rode ahead last night. Stocked the stove, made sure the water barrel hadn't cracked." She turned to him. "You knew I'd say yes. I hoped you would." Boone led the horses to the corral, his steps unhurried. Delia followed him with her eyes, taking in the way he moved here, less guarded, as if the land recognized him and he it. Inside, the shack smelled of dry pine and smoke. A low bed sat against the far wall, neatly made. A table with 2 chairs stood under the window, and a small cast iron stove held a pot that still radiated warmth. Delia ran her fingers along the edge of the windowsill where someone had carved a line of initials. "Not his. I bought it from a miner who lost his wife to fever," Boone said, seeing her gaze. "He didn't want to stay after that." She didn't ask more. Some names were better left to the wood. That evening, Boone lit the oil lamp and set 2 tin plates on the table. He scooped beans from the pot and sliced half an onion into thin curls with the same knife he'd used to cut fence wire earlier. Delia sat across from him, her hands still faintly stained from the trail. "You ever lived this far from a town?" he asked. She shook her head. "I lived in St. Louis most of my life. The buildings there scrape the sky." Boone chewed slowly. "You miss it." "I thought I would," she said. "But I don't." He poured coffee into 2 enamel mugs and passed one to her. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth sink in. "I never knew what it felt like to be looked after," she said, not lifting her eyes. "You're not a burden," Boone said. "You never were." She looked up then. "That's not what I meant." He waited. "I meant I never knew what it felt like to want to stay." The quiet between them stretched, not heavy, but full. Boone leaned back slightly. "If you want to make this home, I'd be glad for it. But I won't hold you here." "I didn't come because I had nowhere else," she said. "I came because you offered something better." Boone's gaze didn't shift away. "Then stay." "Not because I claimed you, but because you claimed me right back." She rose from the chair, moved to stand beside him. "You built this roof with your own hands. Let me help you keep it." Boone stood and reached for her, not with urgency, but with the kind of reverence a man uses when he knows what he's reaching for is real. His hand settled against her back, and hers found his collar. Their lips met in the lamplight, not with hesitation, but certainty. Later, as darkness folded around the shack and the stove crackled low, Delia lay beside Boone beneath a quilt she hadn't seen before, a patchwork of old shirts and flour sacks. She traced one square with her fingertip, then turned her head toward him. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we'll need to check the fence line." Boone's arm tightened around her waist. "We'll ride at first light." Outside, the land breathed in the night, the kind of night that held no ghosts, only the steady promise of what could be built, hand by hand, beside someone who'd stay. A week passed beneath the sloping sky, each day beginning with the hush of morning light pouring through the window over the table, and ending with the hush of Boone's voice as he read aloud by lamplight from a book he'd found in a trading post years back, a worn volume of natural philosophy, mostly forgotten until Delia pulled it from the trunk under his bed. She listened to him read with her legs curled beneath her, the hem of her borrowed skirt trailing the floor. He didn't stumble over the words, though his voice slowed when the sentences turned long and winding. She liked the way he paused sometimes, not for effect, but to make sense of what he read. He set the book down one evening with a leather strip marking the page. "I never thought I'd be saying any of this out loud," he said. Delia folded her hands in her lap. "You sound like it belongs to you." Boone glanced toward the stove. "I was taught to read by a woman who kept house at Fort Huachuca. She ran laundry and fed the quartermaster's boys. She'd sit me on a crate and make me sound out the Psalms." Delia leaned forward. "Was she kin?" "No. She was colored, name of Miss Inez. Said she wouldn't let another child grow up dull just because the world expected it." Delia was quiet for a moment, then said, "I wonder if she'd be glad to know where you ended up." Boone's jaw shifted slightly. "I think she would." Outside, the wind picked up, tugging at the eaves. Delia rose to latch the shutter. "There's a storm coming," she said. Boone stood too, went to the door, and stepped out onto the porch. The clouds were piling to the north, thick and low, the scent of rain just beginning to rise. Delia watched him from the doorway. "I've never seen a desert storm," she said. "You'll feel it before you see it. Comes in heavy like it's got something to prove." She took his hand, the weight of it warm and solid. "Then I hope it proves it." They brought in the basin of kindling, checked the roof ropes, and tucked the mule under the lean-to. When the rain came, it came hard, drumming the roof like hooves across packed earth. The shack held firm and the stove burned steady, casting flickers of amber across the wooden walls. Delia knelt near the hearth, drying her hair with a cloth. "I used to think I'd end up in a parlor somewhere, pouring tea and smiling at things I didn't mean." Boone sat on the floor beside her, legs stretched out, boots still damp. "You glad you didn't?" "I didn't know I wouldn't be until now." She looked at him. "There's something honest about this place. About you." He ran a thumb along the seam of his jeans. "I don't have much to give, Delia. No silver. No lace. Just this land and the work that comes with it." She reached across and touched his wrist. "I didn't come for lace." The rain softened near midnight, the thunder rolling farther away. Boone stirred the stove one last time, then turned to her. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, "about building on. A second room off the back. Maybe a porch wide enough for a swing." Delia looked up. "You think ahead that far?" Boone's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but near enough. "I do now." She rose to her feet, offered her hand. "Then let's mark the ground tomorrow. I want to help." He stood, took her hand, and pressed his forehead to hers. "You already have." That night, she lay against him with the rain tapering off and the wind gentler now, like the sky had sighed its weight away. She traced the edge of his collarbone with her fingertip, and he breathed steady beside her. Morning would bring mud and work and the rehanging of the gate that had slipped loose in the wind. But the roof had held. The stove was still warm, and Boone's hand rested open against hers. They did not speak. They didn't need to. By late April, the days had stretched longer and dry heat pressed from the ground up. The wild lupin had faded from the hills, leaving behind brittle stems and the scent of dust. Delia stood at the corner of the clearing behind the shack, a length of twine pulled taut between her hands and Boone's, the two of them marking the shape of the new room. Boone pushed a cedar stake into the earth with his boot heel. "That'll square the back wall," he said. "Should leave enough space for shelves." Delia stepped back to study the outline. "And a window facing east." He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "We'll cut one. Morning light's softest that way." She glanced toward the ridge behind the house. "I'd like to plant something up there. Not food. Something that blooms." "You want flowers?" "I want color." Boone's eyes followed hers, then dropped to her hands. "We'll find seed next time we ride south." The hammer and saw came out the next morning. Boone worked shirtless in the heat, and Delia handed him nails and steadied boards without needing to be asked. They argued once about the door latch. She wanted it inside. He said it would swell in the heat. Stick. In the end, he built it her way, and when it opened clean on the first try, she only said, "Told you." That evening, they sat on the new porch step, their boots dusty and shoulders streaked with sun. Boone passed her a tin cup of well water, and she drank slow, watching a lizard dart across the packed earth. "You ever think about the future?" she asked. He tipped his hat back. "I think about keeping things standing. That's about as far as I've gone." "What about things growing?" He looked at her then, long enough that she felt it behind her ribs. "If they grow with you, I'll plant anything." She leaned into him and pressed her cheek to his shoulder. "I want to stay here. Not just for now. For always." He didn't speak at first, but his arm came around her waist, and she felt the weight of his promise in the way he held her. They married under the cottonwoods by the stream. No preacher, no paper. Just Boone's hand in hers and the words spoken low and certain, as true as anything ever written. Ruth came from Bisbee with a sack of flour and a length of blue ribbon. The marshal brought a jug of cider and a folding stool he insisted was a wedding gift. Boone built a table from mesquite wood for the new room, and Delia painted the shutters white. She found seed for desert marigold and penstemon, and planted them in a row beside the porch. They took root slow, but they took. By the time the first summer storm rolled across the ridge, the new room held shelves with jars of beans and cornmeal, a rocking chair Boone had carved from juniper, and a quilt stitched from scraps Delia sewed by lamplight. One night, as the wind curled around the walls and the coyotes cried far off. Boone stirred in his sleep and reached for her. She turned toward him, their legs tangled under the quilt. "I ever tell you about the first time I saw you?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. "You said you didn't expect to find anyone there." "I didn't. But when I did, I knew." She brushed her thumb along his jaw. "Knew what?" "That I'd never ride past you." Delia folded into him, her breath steady. "Then don't." "I won't," he said and meant it. Years passed quiet and full. The flowers took hold. The porch swing hung sturdy. The mule grew old and was replaced by a gelding with a white blaze and a gentler nature. Some evenings Boone would ride the fence line and return to find Delia bent over her sewing or reading aloud from the same book he'd once struggled through. She still read slow but deliberate. He liked the way the words sounded in her mouth. They never had a parlor, never needed one. Instead, they had the porch steps, the ridge blooming wild each spring, and a roof they'd built together. And they had each other, always. Forever, exactly where they chose to be.